Aloha, pals. Welcome to part 11 of Being in the Way. It's just this 22-part excavation of the greatest sermon ever preached, the Sermon on the Mount, as recorded in Matthew's Gospel. So this is the halfway point. This one is called Icon, the Way of Clear Sight. Christ is recorded as saying that the eye is the lamp of the body. So, if your eye's healthy, then your whole body will be full of light. And if your eye's unhealthy, then your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? So in the verses just preceding this one, and we talked about this last week with part 10, Jesus talks about treasure. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And treasure is just this shorthand for the various particularities that we sense that we deeply need and that we go out and gather, and that we then spend a tremendous amount of emotional and psychological energy fearing we're going to lose, or trying to figure out why they aren't quite satisfying in the ways that we thought they would. And I don't want to make that point too trite. I feel like it's really easy to just breeze through that as like some vague critique on materialism. But the things that we treasure that are as varied as there are people on this planet. And so I think if we're going to take that teaching serious, it requires some serious work of contemplation and self-reflection, just to find the places where we're hung up. Because as last week's teaching illustrated, the things that we treasure and often go unnoticed, they sort of can direct our lives from the shadows. But the things that we treasure, the things we're most fascinated with, shape our imagination, and our imagination, in turn, shapes the direction of our life. And it's no small thing. So Jesus comes straight out of this observation and begins to speak of the eye, or more accurately, begins to speak about the act of perception, about the way that we see. Because the things that we treasure exert an outsized influence over the way that we see. This phenomenon can be viewed and analyzed in the way that the mind almost subconsciously quietly pushes anything that complicates our preferred story into the edges of awareness. If the details don't match the story that we want to be telling ourselves about ourselves, if we find incongruencies, like, oh, maybe my character isn't quite as noble as I hoped it was, the mind immediately reaches to explain or justify the anomaly. And if a justification can't quickly be found, then the anomaly is pushed to the edges of awareness, quietly, efficiently, quickly. There's a saying that we see the world not as it is, but as we are, which reminds me of this Christian bumper sticker that was popular in the 90s. You don't see it too much anymore these days, but back in the 90s, these things were all over station wagons across America. And the bumper sticker said, "The Bible says it, I believe it, that settles it." And part of me wishes it was that easy. Part of me longs for the days when it was that easy. But objectivity is difficult to come by. We don't simply look at the world. We look through ourselves at the world, through our history, through our trauma, through our attractions and our aversions, through our survival strategies, through the many conclusions that we formed long ago in order to survive experiences that we couldn't understand. And all of that just muddies up the lens. I don't know if you're a glasses wearer. I am, and I'm almost embarrassed to admit that I was many decades into my life before I started to notice like how profoundly smudged and fingerprint encrusted my glasses were most of the time. And the way that I realized that my lenses were pretty dirty was by observing the sun coming through the lenses of like friends of mine who also had fingerprint smudges, and I would think to myself, how can they even see through those lenses? And then one day I thought, I wonder if mine is the same. Oh yeah, look at, how about that? Which is, I guess that's like a modern update of the classic Jesus statement of, why are you concerned about the law or about the speck in your brother's eye when maybe you ought to be focused on the log in your own eye? The same thing is true here. Glasses, lenses. We pretty easily can operate like poor sight is close enough because we're familiar with it. But familiarity and accuracy are obviously not the same thing. There's this old Indian saying I heard once that if a pickpocket meets a saint, the only thing he'll notice are the saint's pockets. If a pickpocket meets a saint, he only notices his pockets. And the same is true with us. Like, to the fearful eye, there's danger everywhere. To the shamed eye, there's judgment in every room that it enters. The approval-seeking eye warps every conversation into some kind of like an audition. The resentful eye converts ordinary relational failures into evidence of some sort of hidden contempt. The lonely eye turns small gestures of kindness into enormous evidence of destiny. The eye of power immediately groups all of us into simple categories like winners and losers, allies or threats. And probably most dangerously, the religious eye or the moral eye calls our perceptions clear sight or discernment or revelation or common sense, or most destructively, the will of God. The depressing and incomprehensible amount of damage that religious communities have enacted upon other cultures and folks and people that don't see things the same way that we do, And I think this is why Jesus' language is so severe. He's like, if the light within you is darkness, that is a pretty great darkness. It is the deepest darkness. The deepest darkness is the darkness that believes itself to be light. It is interpretation that has forgotten it's an interpretation. It's projection that thinks of itself as perception. The way of clear sight doesn't begin by focusing harder on the things out here. The way of clear sight begins by becoming profoundly interested in the lens through which we're viewing. There's a saying like, what we see is a lot less important than where we're seeing from. So when we ask not only like, what am I looking at, but also what am I seeing through, then we're at least making the first steps towards clear sight. Carl Jung called this phenomena projection. Projection is when some aspect of our interior life, something unknown, something rejected, something undeveloped, or something unbearable to our conscious personality, our sense of self. When some aspect of our interior life is encountered as though it belongs exclusively to someone or something outside of us, that is projection. And we don't do this on purpose. We don't decide to project. It just it happens prior to conscious intention. Jung wrote, projections change the world into the replica of one's own unknown face. Projection changes the world into the replica of one's own unknown face. And that sentence contains an entire spiritual anthropology. If there's anger inside of us, but we consider ourselves to be a peaceful and tolerant person, then suddenly we can become very sensitive to any evidence of anger around us. If we can't see how obsessed with control we actually are because we like to think of ourselves as simply a helpful person, then we experience the people around us as unorganized and unreliable and also incapable of functioning in this world without our help. And we can feel like we're just responding honestly to the world, but we're often reacting to a world that's inhabited by the unknown contents of our own soul. Instead of experiencing other people in their complexity and in their freedom, we see the image that we've projected onto them as a controlling person or a selfish person, or as a uniquely understanding or an enlightened person, somebody who's dangerous or someone who's possessing the life that I long to live. And I don't know, have you ever had the experience of meeting somebody for the first time and you felt like you've known them before? Or you felt like you've known them forever? It's like interpersonal deja vu. It's a strange phenomena. But I think this idea of projection can explain why a person can seem strangely familiar when we first meet them. It's because we're meeting not just them, we're also meeting a lost part of ourselves arriving to us in the form of somebody else. And the trick is that these two things can become fused together. Meeting them and meeting ourselves can feel like one thing. And clear sight, what we're talking about here this morning, is that clear sight invites us to sort of gently begin to separate the places where perception has become fused, so that you can be yourself and that I can be myself, and that maybe, even if it's been 30 years of being around each other, we can get to know each other for the first time. You know, the people that disturb us most can become our greatest spiritual teachers if we let them. And we allow that to happen by simply noticing our disproportionate reactions, our consistent accusations, the quality in someone else that we can't stop noticing. These might just mark the place where our own unknown face is waiting to be recognized. Because elsewhere, Jung wrote that until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our life and we'll call it fate. There's a rather brilliant guy called Brian McLaren, who's a pastor and an author, and he's written much on what we might call the collective unconscious, the lens that's carried by families and by churches and by political tribes and by entire cultures. Because our distortions are often handed to us through the communities that teach us what can be seen, what must remain unseen, what deserves sympathy, what deserves suspicion, which questions are permittable, and which conclusions preserve our sense of belonging, and which conclusions are going to put us outside the group somewhere. And we learn this by watching other people, venture questions in church. Well, what about this? I thought that. And you see the reaction of, and you learn, okay, I'm not going to ask that question. McLaren names 13 biases. And if you were here on Sunday, you got a little handout with all 13 of them. But for brevity's sake, we're going to focus just on 3. The first is this: confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is the way that our existing story or system excludes anything that doesn't fit neatly within it. So once we've formed an interpretation, the mind begins fiercely protecting it. Evidence that supports the story that we've come to believe is regarded as self-evident and obvious. Evidence that complicates the story either fades into the background or is reinterpreted as further proof of the story that we already believe. We cast our unknown face on the world, and then we search the world for details that resemble that face. It's confirmation bias. The second is this: community bias. So every community has forms of illumination and forms of blindness, ways of perceiving suffering with exquisite sensitivity, and ways of remaining strangely numb in front of suffering that falls outside of the group's accepted story. We learn what's obvious by watching what the people around us treat as obvious. We learn what's ridiculous by hearing what the people around us laugh at. We learn what is unspeakable by watching what happens when somebody chooses to speak in a certain way. And because belonging is one of the deepest human needs, the cost of seeing clearly is painfully high. Can be. Because seeing what the community doesn't want to see and has instructed us not to see, it threatens not only like just some abstract opinion, but it threatens a sense of home, our idea of what love and acceptance even are. It threatens our language and our identity. It threatens just an entire network of love. It's risky stuff. Maybe one of the most difficult to understand aspects of modern Christianity is the religiosity prevalent in so much of what calls itself the church. When you read the Gospels, at least for me, what I see in Jesus is not a man who is trying to start a new religion called Christianity. I see a person who is trying to, at great personal risk and cost, trying to excavate the truth out of his own religious system, a truth that had been like hidden and covered up by just an unthinkable number of laws that put a religious class in a position of authority, of saying who is in and who's out, who's doing this thing right and who's doing it wrong. And Jesus just rejected nearly all of those like socially accepted norms in order to get to the heart of what he experienced as the truth of Judaism, which is just the radical accepting nature of God. And in doing so, he threatened the religious class, who called him a hypocrite and a heretic and a troublemaker, and eventually had him crucified. And the fact that Christianity has essentially become a new pharisaical system without being able to see it, I don't think it's like doesn't seem to be like an intentional choice made by a vicious class of Illuminati pastors or something. There's no shadow government. It just is like intrinsic to human nature. That the clearer we know what it is that we believe, and we need to hang on to these beliefs and defend them, the next logical impulse, the way that is expressed, is just through binary statements of right and wrong and in and out. And the same system that crucified Jesus got, just as Jesus was resurrected, the system was resurrected in his name, perpetuating the same ideologies that led to the crucifixion of the founder of the system. The irony is unbearable. And, Jesus, interestingly, never once was recorded as saying, "Worship me." And that is what is done primarily in churches all across this fine nation of ours. We all have worship services. Jesus never said, "Worship me," not even once. You know what he said all the time? He said, "Follow me." And if we're following him, we ought not to be surprised if it puts us in the crosshairs of the religious system that you get it, right? Pick up your cross daily and follow me, says the Master. And we do, and then we're surprised when suffering occurs. It's only through periods of great suffering and great love that we're actually transformed. Everything else is too comfortable. My son, we were at the beach this week, and my son found this shell, and it had the beginnings of a pearl. It was an oyster shell with a pearl being formed in it. And he reminded me that, the oyster becomes a pearl of great price through agitation. That's what turns an oyster into a pearl. Suffering. So there's community bias. There's also consciousness bias. And McLaren summarizes it simply like this. Some things can't be seen from the place that we are right now. That means there are truths that require like a greater interior capacity. We have to become bigger on the inside. And that happens through a longer experience of grief, a deeper acquaintance with our own shadow, a more expansive compassion, which is usually generated through a deeper acquaintance with our own shadow and a longer experience of grief. That is where compassion often arises. And when we can become more compassionate with those around us and ultimately with ourselves, then we end up having a less defended nervous system and a willingness to lose an identity that we felt was essential. A greater interior capacity is also this maturity that allows two realities to remain present without forcing either one to disappear because we can't hold them together. Some things can't be seen from where we are right now, and that's all right. I think that it's actually it's a compassionate thing to recognize, because it helps us be easier on who we were 5 years ago when we made that whole host of mistakes that we're still cleaning up right now. It can be easy to become very frustrated with Bobby of 5 years ago. But if I go back into the mind of Bobby of 5 years ago, I remember that guy was doing the best he could with what he understood when he understood it. And if I could go back again, and I would do it different, but that's really a kind of useless thought experiment. We just can take the lessons that grief teaches us and continue to work. It's acknowledging our biases engenders a kind of humility. And humility isn't like thinking poorly of ourselves. Just humility is kind of perpetual honesty. It's remembering that we never see from nowhere. We're always seeing from somewhere. And the place where we're seeing requires constant re-examination if the desire is to see clearly. And to me, that's what contemplation is. That's the work of contemplation. So, like when the surface of water is agitated, and we're looking into that surface, then our reflection breaks into fragments. And like my ordinary habit is to like study each fragment more intensely and to like assign meaning to whatever ripple is heading out and away, while adding more motion to the water through all this analysis and accusation and fear and like the compulsive rehearsal of my already pre-existing conclusions. And like what contemplation does is contemplation just allows the water to settle. The water settles and we finally can see ourselves clearly. And we might notice that the anger I am so agitated by out there, it's bothering me because there's anger in me. There's fear happening in me. There's longing happening in me. There's certainty that I know I'm seeing this right. I know I'm seeing it right. And I'm not going to be gaslit, and I'm not going to... There's a certainty. There is an image of you and who you are. And I have no idea if it's accurate or not, as long as I'm sure that it's accurate. Right? So a body full of light, as Christ says, is when the eye is healthy, and that word is actually one. When our seeing is one, then our body is full of light. And that doesn't mean that we've like attained to perfect objectivity. It's a body full of light is a person becoming transparent. And a transparent person can see beauty without needing to possess it. Who can see harm being inflicted without responding in hatred. Who can recognize our own shadow without collapsing into shame. Who can say with increasing tenderness that, like, that's in me too. Whatever is in you, it's also in me. The capacity for deception, the capacity for courage, the saint, the fool, the desire to be loved in the way that love masquerades, or the way that control masquerades as love. The entire unfinished, in-process human being. And slowly our sense of self starts to lose some of the rigid labels of hero or victim. Just a human being among other human beings, standing together in the terrible and gracious light of God. At the end of his epic poem, Little Gidding, T.S. Eliot writes, We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and to know the place for the first time. Through the unknown, unremembered gate, when the last of earth there is to be discovered is that place where it all began. This is to see the tree beneath the name that we gave it, to see the person beneath the role that we've assigned them, and to see ourselves beneath the shame and the performance and the accusation that helps distract ourselves from the feeling of shame, to see the person beneath all these maneuvers, and finally to see God no longer as an object out here somewhere, just beyond our scope of vision, but to learn to see God as the light by which every face we've ever seen has been illuminated. Just end with this line by Meister Eckhart. He says something like, "The eye by which I see God is the same eye by which God sees me." One eye, one knowing, one sight, one love. Well, thank you for being here. We're back together, all together now at the Garden Club. And Corey Kilgannon, remember him? He's going to come and share some tunes with us, and then we're going to wish him and Ella a fond farewell as they make their way up to the mountains of Colorado for a pretty wild adventure together. So, yeah, hope to see y'all there. Thank you for being here and for being you, and love you. Peace.